The drive up the mountain should have felt like coming home. 3 years had passed since Daniel last saw his grandfather's cabin, and every mile of that winding road brought back memories. He remembered summer barbecues on the porch, fishing trips at dawn, and the smell of pine trees mixed with his grandmother's apple pie cooling on the windowsill. Life had gotten complicated after he inherited the place. His job demanded everything, then came the divorce, then his father got sick. The cabin had to wait, but now finally he was going back. The September air was crisp and clean as his truck climbed higher into the mountains. Daniel had taken 2 weeks off work just to reconnect with this place. He'd brought tools to fix the porch rail, paint for the shutters, and boxes of his grandfather's old books that belonged back in the cabin library. He was already planning which repairs to tackle first. Maybe he'd even stay longer than 2 weeks. The city had worn him down, and this place always had a way of putting things back in perspective. Then he saw the first sign. Bright yellow, impossible to miss, nailed right to the oak tree at the edge of his property. No trespassing. He slowed the truck, confused. Maybe someone put it up by mistake. But then he saw another one and another. 6 yellow signs in total, marking the path to his cabin like some kind of warning system. His chest tightened. The cabin came into view and Daniel's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The meadow where wildflowers used to grow was now a gravel parking lot. Brand new gravel too, the kind that cost serious money. There were tire marks everywhere, like dozens of cars had been coming and going. The cabin itself looked different. Cleaner somehow. Too clean. The weathered charm his grandfather had loved was gone, replaced with fresh stain and modern light fixtures that didn't belong. Daniel pulled up and tried his key in the front door. It didn't work. He tried again, jiggling it, forcing it. Nothing. Someone had changed the locks on his property. His property, the one his grandfather had built with his own hands back in the 70s. He walked around the cabin, peering through windows. The furniture was all wrong. Where was his grandmother's rocking chair? The oak dining table his grandfather had made? Everything inside looked like it came from a catalog. Generic, modern, soulless. He was standing there, trying to process what he was seeing when he heard a voice behind him. "You must be Daniel." He turned to find an older man walking up from the neighboring property. His face was weathered and kind, but his expression was grave. Daniel recognized him after a moment. Mr. Patterson. He'd lived next door for as long as Daniel could remember. "Mr. Patterson, what happened here? Why are there locks I can't open on my own door?" The old man shook his head slowly, like he'd been dreading this conversation. "Son, you're in for a rough time. I tried to find your number to warn you, but nobody had it." "Warn me about what?" Mr. Patterson gestured toward the cabin. "Linda Whitmore. She's the HOA president now. About 6 months after you stopped coming around, she started telling everyone the property was abandoned. Said you weren't paying dues, weren't maintaining the place. Said it was becoming an eyesore and a liability." Daniel felt heat rising in his face. "Abandoned? This is my cabin. My grandfather left it to me. And what dues? There was no HOA when my grandfather bought this land." I know. But Linda, she's got a way of twisting things. She produced all these papers. Said your grandfather signed up for the HOA years ago. Said there were certified letters sent to you about unpaid fees. When you didn't respond, she got the board to declare it abandoned property. That's impossible. My grandfather would never have joined an HOA. He bought this land specifically because it was independent. No strings attached. Mr. Patterson's face showed he believed Daniel, but also that belief wasn't going to help much. "Linda's been using your cabin, son. She runs these wellness retreat weekends, charges people $200 a night to stay here, calls it a rustic mountain experience. She's been doing it for almost 2 years now." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Someone had been renting out his family's cabin, making money off his grandfather's legacy. That's theft. That's straight up theft. I know it is. But she's got the HOA behind her, and they've got a lawyer. The Johnsons tried to fight her over their hunting lodge last year. Cost them $15,000 in legal fees, and they still lost. Just gave up and sold the place for less than it was worth. Daniel's mind was racing. This couldn't be legal. It couldn't be. But he was also thinking about his bank account, which wasn't exactly overflowing after the divorce and his father's medical bills. Could he afford to fight this? Could he afford not to? "There's more," Mr. Patterson said quietly. "She's got cameras set up. Security system. She says it's to protect HOA assets, and she's been telling people you're some kind of deadbeat owner who doesn't care about the community. Half the folks around here think she's a hero for taking control of an abandoned property. Daniel looked back at his cabin. His grandfather had spent 30 years coming here every summer, had taught Daniel to fish in the stream out back, had told stories on that porch about his time in the Navy, about meeting Grandma, about building a life, and now some HOA president had just taken it? I need to talk to her, Daniel said. Mr. Patterson nodded. She lives in the big house on Ridge Road, the one with all the flowers out front. But Daniel, be careful. Linda Whitmore doesn't like being challenged. She's made enemies out of people for less. I don't care if she likes it or not. That's my cabin. As Daniel drove down to Linda Whitmore's house, his hands gripped the steering wheel tight. 3 years. He'd been gone 3 years, dealing with life falling apart, and someone had decided that was long enough to just take what was his. He thought about his grandfather's voice, always calm, always reasonable. The old man would tell him to think this through, to gather facts before acting. But his grandfather had never had to deal with someone stealing his home. The house on Ridge Road was exactly what Mr. Patterson had described. Immaculate. Every flower bed perfect. Every shrub trimmed to precision. The kind of place that screamed control and order. Daniel parked and walked up to the door, his heart pounding. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he knew he had to say something. Tomorrow he'd figure out the legal side. Tonight he just needed answers. He needed to look this Linda Whitmore in the eye and understand how someone could think they had the right to take another person's family legacy. He rang the doorbell and waited. Through the frosted glass he saw a figure approaching. The door opened and there she stood, 50-something, perfectly put together with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be Daniel," she said. Exactly like she'd been expecting him all along. "We need to talk about your property situation." Linda Whitmore stepped aside and gestured for Daniel to come in, like she was welcoming an old friend rather than someone whose property she'd taken over. Her living room was as perfect as the outside. White couches that looked like no one had ever sat on them, glass tables without a fingerprint, and fresh flowers arranged just so. Everything about this woman screamed control. "Please sit," she said, pointing to one of those pristine couches. Daniel remained standing. "I want my key back," he said. "No pleasantries, no small talk. You changed the locks on my cabin." Linda's smile stayed fixed in place. "Your cabin? Well, that's actually what we need to discuss." She walked over to a desk and pulled out a folder thick with papers. "You see, Daniel, when property owners abandon their homes for extended periods without maintaining HOA obligations, there are procedures in place. My grandfather never joined any HOA. Actually, he did." Linda opened the folder and pulled out a document. "Right here. Signed in 2008. When the Pine Ridge HOA was established, your grandfather voluntarily enrolled the property. It's all documented." Daniel took the paper she offered. The signature was wrong. He'd seen his grandfather's handwriting thousands of times. The old man's hands had shaken from arthritis in his later years, making his signature distinctive. This looked nothing like it. Too smooth, too steady. But pointing that out now wouldn't help. He needed to stay calm and gather information. Even if that were true, you can't just take someone's property. "We didn't take it, Daniel. We protected it. You were sent certified letters at your last known address. Multiple letters over the course of 18 months. You never responded. You never paid the dues. You never showed up for required community meetings. According to our bylaws, after a year of non-compliance, the property is considered abandoned, and the HOA has the right to secure it and prevent it from becoming a liability." "What address did you send these letters to?" Linda consulted her papers. 413 Oak Street, apartment 2B. That apartment. Daniel had moved out of there 2.5 years ago. He'd updated his address with the post office, with his bank, with everyone that mattered. But he'd never thought about an HOA because there wasn't supposed to be one. "I haven't lived there in years. That's unfortunate, but it was your responsibility to keep your contact information current with the HOA. We can't be held responsible for your failure to communicate." The way she said it, so calm and matter-of-fact, made Daniel's blood boil, but he forced himself to stay level. "Let me get this straight. You claim I didn't pay dues for an HOA I never knew existed, didn't respond to letters sent to an old address, and that gave you the right to change my locks and rent out my family's cabin?" Not just rent it out. We maintained it. We upgraded it. Do you know what condition that cabin was in? The roof was leaking. The steps were rotting. It was becoming dangerous. We invested thousands of dollars into making it safe and presentable. Someone had to be responsible. I would have been responsible if anyone had actually contacted me. Linda's smile finally faded a bit. Daniel, I understand you're upset. But this community has standards. We have property values to maintain. When owners neglect their properties, it affects everyone. Your cabin was sitting there empty, falling apart. We did what needed to be done, and made money doing it. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. The rental income went to the HOA fund, which benefits the entire community. Road maintenance, snow removal, community events. Everyone benefits. Everyone except me. Linda stood up straighter, and Daniel could see her switching from fake friendly to something else, something harder. If you want to dispute this, you're welcome to hire a lawyer and take it up with our attorney. But I'll warn you, we've been through this before with other property owners who thought they could ignore community rules. It doesn't end well for them. The HOA has resources. We have a lawyer on retainer, and we have the law on our side. Daniel thought about what Mr. Patterson had said. The Johnsons had spent $15,000 fighting and lost. How much would this cost? Could he even afford it? But then he thought about his grandfather teaching him to fish, about his grandmother's laugh echoing through that cabin, about every summer memory tied to that place. I'm not the Johnsons, he said quietly. No, you're not. You're someone who abandoned property for 3 years. Think about how that looks to a judge. Think about how it looks to this community. Linda walked to her front window and looked out at the perfectly manicured street. Pine Ridge isn't what it used to be. We're building something better here. An upscale mountain community where people take pride in their properties, where there are standards. We don't need absentee owners who show up once in a blue moon and expect everything to be waiting for them. That cabin has been in my family since 1972. Before any of this HOA nonsense, Linda turned back to him, and now the mask was completely off. The friendly neighbor act was gone. Then maybe you should have paid more attention to it. Maybe you should have opened your mail. Maybe you should have been here. She walked to her front door and opened it. I have a lawyer. A good one. If you want to make this difficult, that's your choice. But I promise you, Daniel, it will be expensive and you won't win. People like you never do. Daniel walked to the door but stopped in the threshold. People like me? People who think rules don't apply to them. People who think family legacy means they can ignore community standards. This isn't 1972 anymore. Things change. Either adapt or move on. Daniel left without another word. His whole body was shaking with anger as he walked back to his truck. He sat in the driver's seat for a full minute, trying to process what had just happened. Linda Whitmore had basically admitted to taking his property, and she'd done it with the confidence of someone who'd gotten away with it before. He drove back up to his cabin and parked outside, staring at it. Through the windows, he could see someone had hung generic mountain landscape paintings on the walls. His grandmother's paintings, the ones she'd done herself, were gone. Where? Thrown away? Sold? The thought made him sick. Mr. Patterson appeared again, this time with his wife. Mrs. Patterson was a small woman with white hair and worry lines around her eyes. How did it go? Mr. Patterson asked, though his expression said he already knew. About as well as you'd expect. She's got papers saying my grandfather joined the HOA. Fake papers, but papers. She's got a lawyer. She's got the whole board backing her up. Mrs. Patterson spoke up, her voice soft. That woman is poison. She's turned this community into her personal kingdom. Anyone who crosses her gets fined, harassed, threatened. Last year, she tried to fine us $800 because our mailbox was the wrong shade of brown. Said it wasn't community standard. Did you pay it? We couldn't afford to fight it. We're on a fixed income. $800 was our grocery money for 2 months, but a lawyer would have cost thousands. So we paid it and bought a new mailbox in her approved shade of brown. Daniel looked at this elderly couple, good people who'd lived here peacefully for decades, being pushed around by someone on a power trip. How many other families had similar stories? She mentioned other property owners who tried to fight her, Daniel said. Mr. Patterson nodded. The Johnsons and the Morrison family. The Johnsons had that hunting lodge about 3 miles west. They only came up a few times a year, and Linda pulled the same abandoned property routine. They fought for 6 months and spent everything they had on lawyers. Eventually, they just gave up and sold the place at a loss. Linda's friend bought it coincidentally. And the Morrisons? Their property was even older than yours. Been in their family since the 50s. But they lived out of state, and Linda said they weren't maintaining it properly. Claimed there were code violations. By the time they realized what was happening, she'd already gotten liens placed on the property. They settled rather than go to court. Lost half the value of their land. Daniel felt sick. This wasn't just about him. This was a pattern. Linda Whitmore had figured out a system to target properties owned by people who couldn't easily defend themselves, and she was using HOA bylaws as a weapon. There has to be something we can do, Daniel said. Mrs. Patterson looked at her husband, then back at Daniel. Honey, we've lived here for 30 years. We've seen a lot of people try to stand up to Linda. She always wins. Always. She's got money, she's got lawyers, and she's got half the community convinced she's protecting their property values. The other half is too scared to cross her. Daniel spent that night in a motel room 20 miles down the mountain. He couldn't bear to stay at a neighbor's place, and his own cabin was locked against him. He lay awake for hours thinking. By morning, he'd made a decision. Linda Whitmore had won against the Johnsons and the Morrisons because they'd fought her alone. But what if they weren't alone? What if all her victims came together? Before he did anything else, though, he needed to know exactly what he was dealing with. He needed to see those bylaws she kept talking about. He needed to see what other properties she'd targeted. He needed evidence. The next morning, Daniel drove to the county clerk's office. If Linda had filed documents claiming she had authority over his property, those documents would be on record. And if they were fake, if that signature really was forged, then maybe he had a chance. The clerk was a middle-aged woman. Mrs. Rodriguez returned with 3 thick folders and a flash drive. She set them on the counter between them and spoke quietly, even though they were still alone in the office. I can't tell you what to do with this information, she said, but I can tell you that I've been working here for 23 years, and I know what legitimate documents look like. I also know what people who are trying to get away with something look like. Daniel opened the first folder. It was his property. The deed, the original purchase documents from 1972, and then stapled to the back, the supposed HOA enrollment form from 2008. He pulled out his phone and found a photo of a birthday card his grandfather had sent him in 2010. The handwriting was shaky, letters uneven from the arthritis. He held it next to the HOA signature. Not even close. This is forged, he said. I'm not a handwriting expert, Mrs. Rodriguez replied carefully. But if I were you, I might consider getting one. The second folder contained information about the Johnson property. Same story. Original deed from decades ago. Then an HOA enrollment form that appeared around the time Linda Whitmore became HOA president. The third folder was the Morrison family's land. Same pattern. She's done this 3 times, Daniel said, flipping through the pages. At least 3 times, that I know of. There might be others who didn't file complaints or ask questions. People who just paid what she demanded or gave up quietly. Daniel looked at the flash drive. What's on this? Financial records that are public information. HOA income and expenses. You might find it interesting to see how much rental income the Pine Ridge HOA has been reporting and where that money goes. Daniel plugged the drive into one of the public computers. The spreadsheets took a minute to understand, but once he got the pattern, his stomach turned. Over the past 2 years, the Pine Ridge HOA had reported income of over $45,000 from property, management, and rentals. The expenses showed some money going to actual community, things like road salt and speed limit signs, but there were also large payments to something called Mountain Wellness Retreats LLC, $20,000 over 18 months. What's Mountain Wellness Retreats? He asked. Mrs. Rodriguez pulled up the business registry on her computer. Limited liability company registered 2 years ago. Owner is Linda Whitmore. So Linda was paying herself. She was collecting rental income through the HOA, then paying her own company for running the rentals. It was her money going in a circle with HOA paperwork making it look legitimate. This is fraud, Daniel said. That's a strong word. And I'm just a county clerk, not a lawyer or a prosecutor. But yes, to someone who wasn't a county clerk. It might look questionable. Daniel spent the next hour photographing every page, every document, every line of those spreadsheets. Mrs. Rodriguez helped him. showing him which records were public and which ones he'd need a lawyer to subpoena. When he finally left the clerk's office, his phone was full of evidence and his head was full of rage. But rage wouldn't help. He needed a plan. He drove back to Pine Ridge and started knocking on doors. Not randomly, but specifically. He went to every property that looked older, every cabin that had the worn, loved look of a family place rather than a vacation rental. The Pattersons helped, pointing out which neighbors had been around long enough to remember what the community was like before Linda Whitmore. By the end of the day, he'd talked to 12 families. 8 of them had stories about Linda, excessive fines for tiny violations, threats of liens if they didn't comply with new rules that seemed to appear out of nowhere, pressure to make expensive upgrades to properties that had been fine for decades. One couple, the Kowalskis, broke down crying when they told him about Linda's attempt to take over their late son's workshop. They'd paid $8,000 and suddenly discovered back dues just to make her go away. She said if we didn't pay, she'd put a lien on our whole property, Mr. Kowalski said, his voice shaking. We couldn't risk losing our home. We're both 78 years old. Where would we go? Daniel sat with them in their small living room, looking at photos of their son on the walls. Good kid who'd died in a car accident 5 years ago. The workshop had been his dream, the place where he'd built furniture and restored old motorcycles. Linda Whitmore had seen an empty building and dollar signs. Did you keep the paperwork? Daniel asked. From when you paid her? Mrs. Kowalski nodded and retrieved a folder from a desk drawer. Daniel photographed everything. The more evidence he gathered, the clearer the pattern became. Linda targeted older properties owned by people who were vulnerable. Elderly couples, out-of-state owners, anyone who couldn't easily fight back. She used official-sounding HOA language and threats of legal action to scare people into compliance. That evening, Daniel sat in the motel room and organized everything he'd collected. Photos of forged documents, financial records showing self-dealing, testimonies from 8 families about harassment and excessive fines, proof that his grandfather's signature had been faked. It was damning, but he still needed to figure out what to do with it. He couldn't afford the kind of lawyer who could take on an HOA with a retained attorney. The Johnsons had proven that was a losing battle financially. But what if he didn't fight this as a private property dispute? What if this was actually criminal fraud? Would the district attorney's office be interested? His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Daniel, this is Robert Morrison. Mrs. Rodriguez gave me your number. She said you're looking into Linda Whitmore. The Morrison family, the 3rd folder at the clerk's office. Mr. Morrison, yes. I found the records of what happened to your property. That woman destroyed my family. Morrison's voice was tight with old anger. That land was my grandfather's. He homesteaded it in 1954. We used to go up there every summer. My kids learned to camp there. And she took it from us with fake paperwork and threats. I know. I'm sorry. She's trying to do the same thing to me. Mrs. Rodriguez said you're gathering evidence. Said you've got documents. Is that true? It is. Your case, the Johnson property, mine. All the same pattern. Forged HOA enrollments, fake back dues, rental income that goes to her personal company. There was silence on the other end. Then, we gave up because we couldn't afford to fight her alone. But what if we weren't alone? What if all of us, everyone she's targeted, what if we all came forward together? Daniel sat up straighter. This was exactly what he'd been thinking. Do you still have your paperwork? The documents she used against you? Every single page. I kept it all because I knew someday, somehow it would matter. I knew someone would finally see through her. Can you get in touch with the Johnsons? I can try. Last I heard, they'd moved down to Arizona. Pretty much gave up on ever coming back to Pine Ridge. But they'll want to know someone's finally taking her on. They talked for another hour. Morrison had kept meticulous records. Photos of his grandfather's original deed. Copies of the forged HOA enrollment. Records of every payment Linda had demanded. Documentation of the lien she'd placed on his property. He'd been so traumatized by the experience that he'd documented everything, thinking maybe someday he'd find a way to get justice. I'll send you everything I have, Morrison said. And Daniel? Be careful. When Linda realizes you're not going away quietly, she's going to come after you hard. She doesn't like losing. After hanging up, Daniel opened his laptop and started drafting a document. Not a lawsuit. Something else. A complaint to the state attorney general's office about HOA fraud. He laid out the pattern. Multiple properties targeted, forged documents, self-dealing through a shell company, vulnerable victims selected specifically because they couldn't fight back. He attached photos of every piece of evidence he had. Around midnight, his phone buzzed with an email. Robert Morrison had sent 73 pages of scanned documents. An hour later, another email arrived. The Johnsons. Morrison had tracked them down, and they'd pulled their old files out of storage. Another 60 pages of evidence. By morning, Daniel had a document that was over 200 pages long. 3 properties, 3 families, all victimized the same way. The pattern was undeniable. He hit send on the email to the state attorney general's office, then sat back and waited. But he couldn't just wait. While the authorities decided whether this was worth investigating, he needed to do something else. He needed to let the Pine Ridge community know what was really happening. Daniel created a Facebook account and searched for Pine Ridge community groups. He found one with over 300 members. He crafted a post carefully, keeping emotion out of it, just stating facts. He explained who he was, posted photos of his grandfather's real signature next to the forged HOA document, shared the financial records showing Linda paying her own company with HOA money, listed the other properties she'd targeted. He hit post and watched. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. Then the first comment appeared, from a username he didn't recognize. Then another. Then suddenly dozens of comments flowing in faster than he could read them. People were angry. People were sharing their own stories. Someone posted a photo of a ridiculous fine they'd received for their mailbox being 2 inches too tall. Another person shared a letter from Linda, threatening legal action over wind chimes that allegedly violated noise ordinances. The post waited. Linda Whitmore called an emergency HOA meeting 2 days after Daniel's Facebook post exploded. The community center was packed. Daniel had never seen so many people show up for anything in Pine Ridge. Usually HOA meetings drew maybe 15 residents, mostly retirees with nothing better to do. Tonight, there were over 100 people crammed into a space meant for 50. Daniel arrived early and took a seat in the back. He wanted to watch to see how Linda would try to spin this. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson sat next to him along with the Kowalskis. He recognized other faces from his door-knocking campaign, people who'd shared their stories about Linda's overreach. They gave him nods of support as they filed in. Linda sat at the front table with 4 other board members. She was dressed professionally, her expression calm and controlled. But Daniel could see tension in her shoulders. She knew this wasn't going to be a normal meeting. She banged the gavel to call the meeting to order. We have a lot to discuss tonight, but first I want to address the malicious rumors that have been circulating on social media. A hand shot up in the audience. Then another. Then a dozen more. Linda ignored them all. As president of this HOA, I have always acted in the best interest of our community. Every decision I've made has been to protect property values and maintain the standards that make Pine Ridge desirable. Now we have an individual who abandoned his property for 3 years, who owes substantial back dues, and who is spreading lies to avoid his financial obligations. That's not true, someone shouted from the middle of the room. Linda's mask cracked slightly. You're out of order. If you can't conduct yourself properly, you'll be asked to leave. No, you're out of order. It was Mr. Patterson, standing up with a strength Daniel hadn't seen in the old man before. I've lived here for 30 years. I knew Daniel's grandfather. That man never signed any HOA agreement, and you know it. The room erupted. People were talking over each other, some supporting Linda, others backing Mr. Patterson. Daniel could see the divide clearly now. The newer residents, the ones who'd bought into Linda's vision of an upscale mountain community, were on her side. The old-timers, the families who remembered what Pine Ridge was like before the HOA, were against her. Linda banged her gavel repeatedly. Order, we will have order. Mrs. Kowalski stood up, her voice shaking but determined. You extorted $8,000 from us. You said you'd take our home if we didn't pay. You owed legitimate HOA dues and fines, Linda shot back. If you had maintained your property according to community standards, there would have been no fines. Community standards? Another voice, younger this time. Daniel recognized the Martinez family. They owned a small ranch on the east side. You fined us $600 because our fence was cedar instead of pine. A fence that's been there since 1985. My father built that fence. More voices joined in. The woman who got fined for wind chimes. The couple who had to repaint their shed 3 times before Linda approved the color. The man who got threatened with a lien for parking his work truck in his own driveway. Story after story. People who'd been silent for years because they thought they were alone. Linda's face was getting red. These are all legitimate enforcement actions based on our bylaws. Bylaws that every property owner agreed to when they joined the HOA. Except we never joined, Mr. Patterson shouted. Show us the real signatures. Show us proof that anyone actually agreed to this. One of the other board members, a nervous-looking man named Gerald, leaned over and whispered something to Linda. She shook her head sharply. He whispered again, more insistently. Finally, she turned to face him, and they had a brief, heated exchange that the room couldn't quite hear. Gerald stood up. I think we need to table this discussion and review the original enrollment documents. If there are questions about their legitimacy, we should address those questions properly. Sit down, Gerald, Linda hissed. No, I'm sorry, Linda, but this has gone too far. I'm looking at my phone right now at the post Daniel made. Those signatures don't look right to me either. And I'm seeing financial records that show HOA money going to your personal company. I never approved those payments. Linda's control was slipping. Those payments were for legitimate services. Mountain Wellness Retreats managed the rental properties. Rental properties that weren't ours to rent. Daniel finally stood up. Every head in the room turned to look at him. You forged my grandfather's signature. You changed the locks on my family's cabin. You've been collecting money from renting out my property for 2 years. And you expect me to believe that's legitimate? You abandoned that property. I was dealing with a divorce and my father's terminal illness. I didn't abandon anything. I just couldn't get there for a while. That doesn't give you the right to steal it. The room exploded again. This time, Linda couldn't restore order. People were standing, shouting, demanding answers. The newer residents were trying to defend Linda, but they were being drowned out by the long-term community members who'd finally found their voices. A woman Daniel didn't recognize stood on a chair. I just moved here 6 months ago. I bought my house because Linda told me this was a well-managed community with strong leadership. But if what everyone's saying is true, if she's been forging documents and stealing property, then I don't want her anywhere near my home or my family. That seemed to shift something. The newer residents, Linda's base of support, were starting to question her. The doubt was spreading. Linda tried one more time to regain control. This is absurd. Daniel is a disgruntled property owner who doesn't want to pay what he owes. He's turned you all against me with lies and manipulated documents. Then show us the originals, Gerald said. He was still standing, and now another board member stood up next to him. Show us the original enrollment forms. Show us the certified mail receipts. Show us the board approvals for those payments to your company. If everything is legitimate, the paperwork will prove it. Linda looked at him like he'd betrayed her. I don't have to prove anything to a mob. You do, actually, came a new voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned. A man in a suit stood in the doorway holding a briefcase. He looked official, serious, and completely out of place in this mountain community meeting. My name is Thomas Chen. I'm an attorney representing Daniel and the other property owners who've been affected by the Pine Ridge HOA's actions. I'm also here to inform you that the State Attorney General's office has opened an investigation into potential HOA fraud. They'll be requesting all financial records and property documents from the past 5 years. The room went silent. Linda's face had gone from red to white. This meeting is over, she said, grabbing her papers. The meeting is not over, Gerald said firmly. Linda, I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in your leadership as president. Given the serious allegations and the pending investigation, I don't believe you should continue in this role. You can't do that. Actually, according to our bylaws, any board member can call for such a vote. We need a majority of the board to approve it. I vote yes. The woman next to Gerald raised her hand. I vote yes, too. One by one, 3 of the 4 board members voted to remove Linda as president. Only one person sided with her, an older man who'd been her friend for years. But 3-1 was enough. Linda stood there shaking with rage. You're all making a huge mistake. I built this community. I protected your property values. And this is how you repay me? By listening to lies from some deadbeat who couldn't even bother to check his mail? Leave, Gerald said quietly. Please just leave. Linda gathered her things and stormed out, but not before stopping in front of Daniel. My lawyer will destroy you. You'll lose everything. I already lost everything, Daniel said. You made sure of that when you stole my grandfather's cabin. The difference is I'm not giving up. After Linda left, the meeting continued for another hour. Gerald apologized to the community for not seeing what was happening sooner. The board voted to freeze all HOA accounts pending the investigation. They voted to halt all enforcement actions and fines until the bylaws could be reviewed by an independent attorney. And they voted to give Daniel his keys back immediately. One of the board members retrieved a key from the HOA office and handed it to Daniel. His cabin key, the one that should have been his all along. People lined up to shake Daniel's hand as the meeting ended, to thank him for speaking up, to apologize for not supporting him sooner. The Kowalskis hugged him, crying. Mrs. Kowalski pressed a piece of paper into his hand. That's the name of a handwriting expert, she whispered. My late son was a lawyer. He used this expert in a forgery case once. Tell him the Kowalski family sent you. As Daniel walked out of the community center, Thomas Chen caught up with him. The lawyer smiled. That went better than expected, he said. Are you really my lawyer? Daniel asked. Because I should tell you I can't afford what you probably charge. Actually, Robert Morrison hired me. For all of you? Him, the Johnsons, you, and anyone else Linda victimized. He said he's got money from selling his property, and he wants to use it to take her down properly. He asked me to tell you that you're not fighting alone. Daniel felt something break loose in his chest. Relief. Hope. The feeling of not being alone against something bigger than himself. That night, he drove up to his cabin for the first time in 3. The handwriting expert's report came back 3 weeks later. Daniel sat in Thomas Chen's office reading through the technical language that basically said what he already knew. The signature on his grandfather's supposed HOA enrollment form was a forgery. The expert could prove it using pressure analysis, stroke patterns, and comparison to authenticated signatures from the same time period. His grandfather's arthritis had left distinctive markers in his handwriting that were completely absent from the HOA document. This is good, Thomas said. Very good. Combined with the similar forgeries on the Morrison and Johnson properties, we have a clear pattern of fraud. What happens now? Now we file a civil suit for recovery of rental income, damages, and legal fees. But more importantly, the Attorney General's office is building a criminal case. Forgery, fraud, theft. Linda could face serious jail time. Daniel should have felt triumphant. Instead, he just felt tired. The past month had been a blur of paperwork, interviews with investigators, and fighting with insurance companies. Linda had tried one last desperate move, filing a lien against his property for $12,000 in supposedly unpaid dues. But the county judge had taken one look at the forged documents and not only dissolved the lien, but issued a restraining order. Linda Whitmore was legally required to stay 500 feet away from Daniel's cabin. There's something else, Thomas said, sliding another document across the desk. Linda's rental business records. We subpoenaed them as part of the civil suit. She collected $127,000 over 2 years from renting out your cabin, the Johnson Lodge, and the Morrison property. After expenses, she personally profited about $90,000. Daniel stared at the number. $90,000. His grandfather's cabin, his family's memories, reduced to someone else's profit margin. We're asking for triple damages, Thomas continued. That's the standard in fraud cases. Plus interest, plus your legal fees, plus compensation for emotional distress. We're also filing on behalf of the Kowalskis and 6 other families she extorted through fake fines. Will we win? Thomas leaned back in his chair. Daniel, I've been practicing law for 23 years. I've never seen a more clear-cut case. Linda's own financial records prove everything. The forged signatures prove everything. She documented her own crimes because she never thought anyone would question her authority. Yes, we'll win. But winning took time. The legal system moved slowly, grinding through motions and counter-motions. Linda hired an expensive lawyer from Denver who tried every delay tactic in the book. They challenged the handwriting analysis. They tried to argue that the HOA bylaws gave Linda authority to manage abandoned properties. They even tried to claim Daniel had given implied consent by not responding to the certified letters, even though those letters had been sent to an address he no longer lived at. None of it worked. The judge saw through every argument. Meanwhile, Daniel worked on reclaiming his cabin. He'd found his grandmother's furniture in a storage unit Linda had rented under a fake name. The rocking chair, the oak dining table, the paintings his grandmother had made, they were all there, shoved in with trash and old maintenance equipment. He spent a week carefully cleaning and restoring each piece, bringing them back to the cabin one by one. The community rallied around him. Mr. Patterson helped him tear up the gravel parking lot and reseed the meadow. The Martinez family donated wildflower seeds. Mrs. Kowalski brought food every other day, insisting Daniel needed home-cooked meals. Slowly, the cabin started to feel like home again. The new HOA board, led by Gerald, hired an independent lawyer to review all the bylaws. They discovered that Linda had been adding rules without proper board approval for years. Fines that weren't legitimate, standards that didn't exist in the original charter. They spent months undoing her damage, refunding improper fines, and apologizing to families who'd been harassed. 6 months after that first explosive community meeting, the civil trial began. Daniel sat in the courtroom, watching Linda's lawyer try to paint her as a dedicated community servant who'd made honest mistakes. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forged signatures, the self-dealing payments to her shell company, the testimony from a dozen families about her threats and extortion. The Kowalskis testified about the $8,000 they'd paid to save their son's workshop. Robert Morrison flew in from wherever he'd moved to, describing how Linda had stolen his family's legacy. The Johnsons appeared via video call, still too hurt to come back to Pine Ridge in person, explaining how fighting Linda had bankrupted them. Daniel testified too. He talked about his grandfather building the cabin by hand, about his grandmother's paintings, about summer mornings fishing with his dad, about coming back after 3 years of hell to find yellow signs and new locks, as if his family's history meant nothing. Linda's lawyer tried to cross-examine him, suggesting he'd been a neglectful owner. "Isn't it true you didn't visit the property for 3 years?" "That's true." "And you didn't pay any attention to certified mail regarding HOA obligations?" "The mail was sent to an address I no longer lived at. I never received it." "But you didn't update your address with the HOA." "I didn't know there was an HOA. My grandfather never joined one because there wasn't one when he bought the property. The enrollment form with his signature is a forgery." The lawyer tried a few more angles, but there was nowhere to go. The evidence was too clear. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the forewoman read the verdict. "We find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts." The judge awarded Daniel $127,000, the full amount Linda had collected in rental income, plus triple damages for fraud, bringing it to $381,000, plus interest, plus legal fees, plus $50,000 for emotional distress. The total came to just over $500,000. Linda went pale. Her lawyer asked for time to file an appeal. The judge denied it. "Ms. Whitmore, you engaged in systematic fraud against multiple families. You forged documents, you stole property, and you used your position of authority to intimidate vulnerable people. This court finds your actions reprehensible. The judgment stands. You have 30 days to begin payment." Similar judgments were awarded to the Morrisons, the Johnsons, and the other families. Linda would be paying for her crimes for years, but the criminal case was still pending. 2 months after the civil trial, the state attorney general's office filed formal charges. 14 counts of forgery, 8 counts of fraud, 6 counts of theft. Linda's expensive lawyer couldn't make those charges disappear. Daniel didn't attend that trial. He'd had enough of courtrooms. Instead, he focused on living. He'd quit his job in Seattle and moved to the cabin full-time. The settlement money meant he didn't have to work for a while. Could take time to figure out what he actually wanted to do with his life. He started by finishing all the repairs his grandfather had planned but never completed. New roof, reinforced foundation, updated plumbing. He kept the character of the place but made it solid for another 50 years. Mr. Patterson came over most days to help and share stories about the old days. The community changed too. The HOA still existed, but with reformed bylaws focused on actual community needs. Road maintenance, snow removal, fire prevention, no more fines for mailbox colors or fence materials, no more threatening letters over wind chimes. Gerald ran it like a neighborhood association rather than a dictatorship, and people actually started enjoying community events again. One evening, about 8 months after everything started, Daniel sat on his porch watching the sunset. His phone rang. Thomas Chen. She took a plea deal, the lawyer said. 5 years, eligible for parole after 3. She'll also be permanently banned from serving on any HOA board and required to pay full restitution to all victims. 5 years, Daniel repeated. It didn't seem like enough for everything she'd done, but it was something. The Attorney General said it was the best they could do without a lengthy trial. She's 62 years old. 5 years at her age is significant, and she'll be bankrupt after the restitution payments. After hanging up, Daniel sat quietly for a long time. He thought about his grandfather, about all those summers learning life lessons on this porch. The old man had always said that the world had a way of balancing things out. Good and bad, justice and injustice. Eventually the scales evened out if you lived long enough to see it. Maybe he'd been right. Robert Morrison called the next day. Did you hear? I heard. I never thought I'd see justice. After we lost our property, I figured people like Linda just get away with everything. But you proved me wrong. We proved us wrong, Daniel said. You're the one who kept all those documents. You're the one who hired Thomas. You put up the money to fight her, and I'd do it again. My grandfather's land is gone, but at least Linda can't do this to anyone else. That's worth something. It was worth something. Daniel had come to realize that over the past months. He couldn't get back the 3 years Linda had stolen. Couldn't undo the rental income she'd collected or the strangers who'd slept in his grandmother's bed. But he could make sure it never happened to anyone else. That meant something. The Pattersons invited him for dinner that night. Mrs. Patterson made pot roast, Mr. Patterson told old stories, and they sat around the